Hello, and good morning to you, or good evening, or good afternoon, or good middle of the night, depending where you are, since we are virtual. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming to this first Thursday storytelling event that is put on by the Storytellers of San Diego in support of Eclipse Chocolate Bar and Bistro, who have supported us also over the last few years with our storytelling monthly events. Eclipse Chocolate Bar and Bistro is located in the South Park region of San Diego and has wonderful, delicious chocolate treats of all kinds if you care to indulge, if you're in the area. And they also have a full menu, so they are open for business. And we are happy that they are with us this evening, this morning, afternoon, whichever. We are the Storytellers of San Diego who are putting on this monthly event. And we are a nonprofit organization. We've been a nonprofit since about 2010, but the Storytellers of San Diego have been in existence since about the late 70s. And you'll be hearing from 5 of us tonight, stories from people who have been with us for varying lengths of time. The theme of the evening is Tricksters. And so without further ado, I will introduce to you the people who will be regaling you with stories tonight. The first teller will be myself. My name is Fred Laskowski. I've been with the Storytellers of San Diego since about 1995. The person who will follow me is named Jim Dykman. He's been with Storytellers of San Diego since its inception back in the late 70s. He's also the technical genius for our group who has brought you this presentation tonight. And he's also our treasurer. So he's a wonderful storyteller, and I'm sure you'll enjoy him. Following Jim, I'm excited to announce Melanie Lococo. Melanie is a first-time teller with the Storytellers of San Diego at this particular event. Not only that, she's debuting with her first storytelling performance ever. And so we're all looking forward to hearing what she has to tell us about. Following Melanie will be one of our longtime members named David Schmidt. David is a multilingual teller, and I think he'll be using English tonight, so no worries there, and telling us a story from Japan. And we will be, the teller who will follow him, her name is Mindy Donner. She'll be tying it up tonight. She's been a teller with us for quite some time now. She's also a puppeteer in San Diego and has been very involved in that field as well. Tonight she has a story for us, and that'll be our program for the evening. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the story that I came here to tell you tonight. It's called The Raven Steals the Light. It's an old legend from the Haida people in the Pacific Northwest. Before there was anything, before the great flood had covered the earth and receded, before the animals walked the earth, or the trees covered the land, or the birds flew between the trees, even before the fish and the whales and the seals swam in the sea, there was an old man who lived in a house on the bank of a river with his only child, a daughter. They'd never seen each other because they lived there in complete and utter darkness. Because at that time, the whole world was dark, inky, pitchy, all-consuming dark, blacker than 1,000 stormy winter midnights, blacker than anything anywhere has been since. And the reason for all this blackness has to do with the old man in the house by the river, who had a box which contained a box which contained a box which contained an infinite number of boxes, each one nestled inside of a box just slightly larger than itself, until finally there was a box so small that all it could contain was all the light in the universe. The raven, who of course existed at that time because the raven had always existed and always would, was somewhat less than satisfied with this state of affairs, since it led to an awful lot of blundering around and bumping into things. And it slowed him down a great deal in his pursuit of food and in his constant efforts to interfere with and change things. Eventually, all this bumping around in the dark led the raven close to the home of the old man and his daughter. He at first heard a little sing-song voice muttering away. He followed the sound and came to a wall of the house where he placed his ear against the planking and he could just make out the words. I have a box, and inside the box is another box, and inside it are many more boxes. And in the smallest box of all is all the light in the world, and it's all mine, and I'll never give any of it to anyone, not even to my daughter. Well, it took the raven only an instant to decide to steal that light for himself, but it took much longer for him to invent a way of doing so. First, he had to find a door into the house. But no matter how many times he circled it, or how carefully he felt along the planking, it remained a smooth, unbroken barrier. Sometimes he heard the old man or his daughter leave the house to get water or for something else. But it seemed that every time one of them left, it was from the other side of the house from where he was. And by the time he rushed around, he found the wall as smooth and unbroken as ever. Finally, the raven decided to retire a ways upstream. And he thought and thought about how he could enter that house. And in doing so, he began to think more and more of the young girl who lived there. And in thinking about her, that idle speculation gave him an idea that he thought would surely get him into the house. So he waited by the river until the girl, whose footsteps he could distinguish by now from those of her father, came to gather water. Then he changed himself into a single hemlock needle, dropped himself into the river, and floated down just in time to be scooped up in the basket that she was dipping in. Now, even in his much diminished form, the raven was able to make at least a very small magic, enough to make the girl so thirsty that she took a long drink from the basket, and in so doing, swallowed the needle. The raven slithered down deep into her warm insides and found a soft, comfortable spot where he transformed himself once again, this time into a very, very small human being. And he slept for a long while. And as he slept, he grew. Now, the young woman had no idea what was happening to her. And of course, she didn't tell her father, who noticed nothing unusual because it was so dark, until suddenly he became aware indeed of a new presence in the house, as the raven at last emerged triumphantly in the shape of a human boy child. He was, or that is, he would have been, if anyone could have seen him, a strange looking boy with a long beak-like nose and a few feathers here and there. In addition, he had the shining eyes of the raven, which would have given his face a bright, inquisitive appearance if anyone could have seen these features then. And he was noisy. He had a cry that contained all the noises of a spoiled child and an angry raven. And yet, he could also sometimes speak as softly as the wind in the hemlock boughs, with an echo of that beautiful other sound, like an organic bell, which is also part of every raven's speech. It was at times like these that his grandfather grew to love this new, strange member of his household. He spent hours playing with him, making him toys, and inventing games for him. As he grew in the confidence and affection of the old man, the raven began to feel more intently around the house, trying to determine where that light was hidden. And after much exploration, he concluded that it would be in the large box that sat in a corner of the house. One time, he very carefully lifted the lid. Of course, he could see nothing, and all he could feel was another box. But his grandfather heard his precious treasure chest being tampered with, and he dealt very harshly with the would-be thief, threatening dire punishment if the raven child was to ever touch that box again. Well, this triggered a tidal wave of noisy protests, followed by tender importunes, in which the boy never mentioned the light, but only pleaded for the largest box. That box, he told his grandfather, is the one thing that would make me completely happy. Well, as most, if not all, grandfathers have done since the beginning of time, the old man yielded, and he decided to give his grandson the outermost box. This contented the boy for a time, but like most, if not all, grandchildren have done since the beginning, the raven soon pleaded for the next box. It took many days and much cajoling, carefully balanced with well-planned tantrums, but one by one the boxes were removed. When only a few were left, a strange radiance began to infuse the darkness of the house, revealing vague shapes and their shadows, still too dim to be really made out. And then the raven, in his most pitiful voice of all, began to plead to be allowed to hold the light, if only for a moment. Well, this request was instantly refused. But then, of course, the grandfather yielded in time. And so, from the final box, the old man lifted the light in the form of a beautiful, incandescent ball and tossed it to his grandson. He got only a momentary glimpse of this child on whom he had lavished such love and affection. For even as the light was traveling toward him, the boy changed himself once again from a human into a huge black shadow with great dark wings and beak wide open, waiting. The raven snatched up the light in his jaws, thrust his great wings downward, and shot up through the smoke hole of the house, out into the huge darkness of the night. That darkness was at once transformed. Mountains and valleys were starkly silhouetted. The river sparkled with broken reflections, and everywhere life began to stir anew. And far off, another great winged creature launched itself into the air as the light entered the eyes of the eagle for the first time, revealing to him his prey. The raven flew on, rejoicing in his wonderful new possession, admiring the effect it had on the world below, reveling in the experience of being able to see where he was going instead of flying blind and bumping into things and hoping for the best. In fact, he was having such a good time that he never saw the eagle until the eagle was nearly upon him. In a panic, he swerved to avoid those savage, outstretched claws, escaping them, but in the process, dropped a good half of the light that he was carrying. It fell to the rocky ground below and broke into pieces, one large one and too many small ones to count. They bounced back up into the sky and remained there until today, as the moon and the stars that glorify the night. The eagle continued to pursue the raven out beyond the rim of the world, where finally, exhausted by the long chase, the raven dropped the last piece of light that he was carrying. And so out beyond the rim of the world, it floated gently on the clouds until it began to rise up over the mountains lying to the east. Its first rays caught the smoke hole of the house by the river, where the old man sat weeping bitterly over the loss of his precious light, and also over the treachery of his grandson. But as the light entered in, he looked up, and for the first time, he saw his daughter. She had been sitting there all this time, completely bewildered by this turn of events. And when she looked up, she also, for the first time, saw her father. And so the old man and his daughter took hands. They walked outside, and for the first time, at last, they beheld the great beauty of the earth and skies ablaze with light. And they were happy. Thank you. And please now welcome our next teller, Jim Dykman.